All right, what's up, everybody? So today I figured this is a perfect opportunity to make a quote unquote response video to Alexander Bromley's most recent video titled 6 Reasons Strength is Always a Priority. Hypertrophy Crew, listen up. So I figured, as somebody that is definitely part of the hypertrophy crew, someone that's just an aesthetics and bodybuilding bro at heart, this is a perfect video to respond to. And this isn't a response to pick a fight with him or tell him that he's dumb and I disagree with him, because I think he's a very intelligent lifter, really knows what he's doing. He's just in a different part of the industry. So I think what this video does is he provides a couple points that is just an opposing mentality to what I have. And it's not that I disagree with him or think that he's wrong, but I think when it comes to hypertrophy training, there's a very specific mindset that's best to take when it comes to your training and when it comes to your programming. So I think what this video does is it provides a good comparison and contrast to each respective mindset. So I like a lot of his content, and I actually either agree with or just completely empathize and understand with what he talks about in the video. My buddy Carell from Stand Strength sent this video over to me initially, so I decided to watch it. And for the most part, I like what he's saying, and I agree with, like I said, I either agree or just really understand where he's coming from, even if I don't completely agree with him. I think there's 2 points that stick out, and these are the two mindset points that I want to discuss today. And the first one is going to be number 3, so let's dive into that. Also, before I get to it, I do apologize. I know it's subpar apparel today, so let's get to it.
Number 3, strength is easier to track and it's more immediately rewarding.
So his first point is that strength is easier to track and it's more rewarding. So this is something that I don't necessarily agree with. I think strength being easier to track, I think it does have an edge, but I think when it comes to training for hypertrophy, I mean, you can still measure your muscles and you can still take progress pictures in a consistent spot. And when it comes to tracking your strength in the day to day, it's not as black and white as we think. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to your technique, when it comes to your recovery. Like there's a reason why not everything is linear with strength, and it's the same thing with your physique. Like if your measurement's slightly off or your progress photos in a slightly different position or whatever, there are these little things that in the short term can blur the lines of your progress. But I think in the mid to long term, any method, a strength aside, but any outside method of measuring hypertrophy is just as good as any method of measuring strength. So measuring your performance in the gym in the mid to long term is just as reliable as taking progress pictures in the mid to long term, or measuring your actual muscles compared to the progress photos, compared to your body weight in the mid to long term. So I think those are interchangeable, and I think they both have their issues tracking in the short term, but I think they both in the mid to long term even out pretty well. So he also says it's more immediately rewarding to focus on strength. So there's a lot to unpack here. I don't think I'm going to go into my entire philosophy of this one. I just have enough of it on the channel already. But I don't necessarily disagree that strength is more immediately rewarding, because I think if you have the mindset where you see strength increases as a win, I think it would become more immediately rewarding. But I think if you're truly focused on building muscle and building your best physique, you're not as concerned about strength, because if you truly and really want to get bigger, you'll learn ways in which your programming helps you get bigger, and you don't necessarily have to focus as much on strength. It will kind of just happen as long as you understand programming and how to actually execute properly in the gym. So I think while I don't think it's a bad idea to I guess, kind of take a little bit of gratification from your increases in strength and your performance in the gym, I think you're playing with fire, because, and again, this isn't a perfect logical argument. This is purely mindset, and this is, if anything, this is just my personal thoughts. I'm not saying everybody's like this, because I think we all think differently and come from different backgrounds and lift in different physical and mental environments. But when it comes to focusing and using strength as your main source of reward in the gym psychologically, it can draw you towards biasing strength a bit more, because when you attach yourself and you attach that mental and psychological reward that you get from a strength increase, you're more inclined to forget about the lifts that don't give you that satisfaction. So something like a lateral raise or a bicep curl, let alone any other isolation lift or just a small muscle group that you're training, it's very easy to put those muscle groups on the back burner. And I've done that for so long, and I still do that to this day. And it's a mindset that I'm trying to get around. And of course, I've come a long way, but I still don't train abs the best way that I could. I still don't train my calves the best way that I could. Neck, same boat. It took me a long time to actually learn how to embrace training arms. And I think when you're a hypertrophy bro at heart like myself, you have to chase after what you want. And for me, that was bigger arms. That was rounder delts. That's the more complete bodybuilding looking physique. And I think if you're attaching yourself to performance in the gym, you're more inclined to bias yourself towards what would ultimately become a powerlifter's physique, because they train the big muscles and the big movements. And those movements, when you're focused on strength, become more fun. But the problem with that isn't that those movements don't necessarily work for the bigger muscles. It's that you now neglect the small muscles because they're not rewarding to train in the gym. It's the same thing where you hear people talk about, oh, I can't train arms, they're just boring. Like, I'd rather just train the big compounds. That's an issue because now you're too focused on strength that you don't have the mental capacity to train movements that aren't rewarding in terms of strength. So I think if you're focused on your physique with progress pictures and measurements, I think that's great. Rounding it out with tracking your performance in the gym is key. But even then, I prefer to take more of a passive approach. I don't think striving for that PR is the best thing to do, but I think using your strength and your progress in the gym as something to reflect on to make sure things are going well, I think that's the best way to go about doing it.
If you do kind of eliminate all of the strength focused variables in your training because you're just focused on staying in the optimal range, doing a lot of higher rep, what you would consider hypertrophy work, and just getting after it day in, day out, going harder than last time, eventually there's going to be a point where you have difficulty gauging your progress.
Okay, so here, I'm not sure if I cut him off early. I've only watched this once through, so this is kind of a semi-reaction. But what he's saying is that if you're just focusing on training harder than last time, if you're focused on training harder than last time and you're focused on just being in the perfect rep range and everything, it gets harder to track. I'm not entirely sure what he means by this, because if I'm missing the point, I don't want to just bash him or say he's wrong, because it could just be me that doesn't really understand what he's saying. But I think when it comes to tracking strength, if you're just tracking your lower reps, basically what happens here is it's very black and white when failure actually happens. The higher your reps go, the more gray area comes into play in terms of proximity to failure, because what happens is you get into more grindy reps. You have the ability to cheat more. When you're going from a 1 rep max and you're trying to hit it for 2, it's like you're either getting it or you're not. When you're going for what used to be a 14 rep max and you want to go for 15, each of the last 5 reps has been kind of a grinder, maybe a little bit of cheat, and you're going for that 15th. It's just this tiny little increase. Instead of going from a 1 rep max and turning that into a double, and you're going for that massive increase in performance in terms of percentages, that's easy to track. Going from that 14 to 15, it is a little bit tougher to track. But at the end of the day, it's not necessarily those tiny little jumps in reps or in weight that you're doing that make the program worth tracking, or your training worth tracking. I think it's the slightly longer term. I think it's not necessarily going from 14 to 15, but it's like, all right, well, if you're at 14 reps for a lateral raise and you're still at 14 a month, 2 months, 3 months from now, that's probably an issue. I think you have to give yourself a little bit more time to be able to see these changes in hypertrophy training. So I think the day-to-day, even sometimes the week-to-week, isn't the most reliable. I think sometimes just zooming out a little bit and taking the short term as maybe a bi-weekly system, or even as you get more advanced, a monthly system, I think that's important. So I don't know if this is the point he's making, but let's see if he elaborates on it.
If you switch your training up a lot, or it's very instinctive, you're not going to be able to chart those very even increases in progression.
Okay, so he's saying if you change your training a lot, or you train with instinct, then it's tough to measure your progression. And I agree, But I think if you're training properly for hypertrophy, I don't think you're changing up your training that much. At least in terms of exercise selection, I think most people that train for hypertrophy, and this is myself, my clients, and what I see, it's a lot of double progression, and he mentions that in this video, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Even if you jump into like a triple progression where you're letting your volume auto-regulate or manipulate over time, it's still pretty easy to track your progression regardless of rep ranges. The only thing that really makes it a little bit blurrier is going to be lift rotation, which the people that train for hypertrophy don't rotate their lifts that often, at least not often enough to where you're not going to be able to gauge progression properly. So I'd argue that if you are having a hard time measuring progress through your training just because you're rotating lifts a ton and you're going purely based on instincts, there's probably a bigger issue in your program than something as simple as just tracking your progression.
And if you just get in the habit of looking at yourself in the mirror to gauge progress, you're going to get what a lot of bodybuilder and physique guys have, which is a little bit of body dysmorphia.
Okay, this next point is a tricky one. So he says if you're relying too much on looking at yourself in the mirror, you'll end up getting body dysmorphia, or you at least have a higher chance of getting body dysmorphia. And this is a tough one where I don't necessarily feel like alone in this entirely, but I trained for bodybuilding, and I didn't get into it because I was insecure or didn't like my physique. I actually really liked my physique before I started lifting because I was just kind of thin and like had abs. I looked pretty good for your average person. Of course, it wasn't like a bodybuilder physique or anything, but I had a decent looking physique. I think when it comes to body dysmorphia, of course, this is a nuanced conversation because it varies from person to person, and just because I don't have it doesn't mean other people don't have it. I think that's a ridiculous thing to say, and I think I see firsthand a lot of people do have this issue. But at the same time, if you're taking progress pictures, that is far more objective than just looking at yourself in the mirror. I think let's say you just forget everything about your strength training each week. Like each week you go into a new strength training cycle or a new program or whatever, and you just are, let's hypothetically, you cannot remember what you're doing in the previous weeks. Just because you feel weak one day when you're an advanced lifter benching 405 and you have a weak day where you're not feeling strong and everything feels like crap, that doesn't mean you're weaker than when you were benching 135 and you felt strong and you had a good day compared to when you're normally benching 125 or something. And I think the same thing goes for checking your physique out in the mirror, where certain days you might feel bigger or you might feel smaller, and that can be one from body dysmorphia, but two, that can just be from fluctuations, the same way that you have it in strength training where some days you're just stronger and some days you're just weaker. The same little micro changes happen in your physique, whether it's from water, from carbs, from sodium, from how much you slept, if you have a tan, like body hair. Like there's all these little things that can slightly change the way you look, and when you're very in tune with your physique or with your strength, you tend to notice these little changes. But these changes don't necessarily mean anything if you can have an objective measuring tool like your previous training history or your progress photos over the last few months, quarters, years, etc.
Anybody who's been focused on weight loss or improving their physique knows what it's like to look in the mirror and see either gross amounts of change where there is none, or see no change where there's been actually huge amounts of change. I experience this every time I go through a cutting phase.
Okay, so he's saying that it's normal and it's common to be able to look at your physique and either see a ton of change when there hasn't been any, or see no change when there actually has been a lot. And essentially what this is body dysmorphia, and that's okay. A lot of people have it. There's nothing necessarily wrong with you or anything. With body dysmorphia, you have to understand that you have to rely on objective measures to beat that demon inside you. And basically what you have to do is take progress pictures or have a coach, have somebody get a very objective look, and that's what progress pictures do. And it's the same exact constant history in the previous weeks, previous months, and years of your training in the gym in terms of performance. If you can take a picture of yourself 2 years ago and say you add 10 pounds of muscle, the progress pictures are going to look much different. You're going to be able to see the objective differences. Same with measurements too. Like if you put mass on your arms over a year or two, like if they're half an inch bigger, it's hard to just, like, body dysmorphia can't overcome that and say, oh, well, it's a different tape measure. Or, if you have these objective measures, you can truly see when you're making progress and when you're not. So even if you do have body dysmorphia, that's a pretty simple way around it, in my opinion. I don't have the best firsthand experience with this stuff, so I don't truly grasp it as much as some other people might. But I have a hard time imagining that going through objective measures, you don't deep down know that you have made progress.
And I lose weight and I feel like I look exactly the same, even though everybody's commenting on how small my waist is and how thin my face is. Similarly, you could have potentially gotten huge. You could have gained a bunch of mass. It's just very hard to gauge. It's very hard because it's such a subjective thing, your appearance. So it's nice to have things in the gym that you can actually...
Okay, so I do agree that your appearance is subjective, but progress in your physique is objective, in my opinion. It's easier to measure than we think, and of course, it's incredibly frustrating to think that we're in 2023 and we still don't have the best way of actually measuring how much muscle mass we have as a bodybuilder. It's frustrating to know that we don't just have this like scan gun that can take a quick measurement of how much mass we actually have, because that would really accelerate how well we program. But I think even with the limited technology that we do have, I think it's pretty objective. If you add a ton of mass or you get a lot bigger, it's pretty obvious to tell as long as you record it.
Actually measure bit by bit. You can sink your teeth into. You can see, oh, I've increased my ability to do reps on this one lift by 20%, or oh, my average weight has gone up this amount. Now, all physique...
I agree with him there. I think tracking your strength is important, but I don't think you should be prioritizing that, and I don't think you should be setting your mental attachment and reward to it. But if my physique's looking better and I feel bigger, my muscle measurements are going up, and my reps or my weight are going up in a double or triple progression, it's just another good indicator. I don't think it should be the sole indicator you focus on, because like I said earlier, that can switch you into a strength-oriented, or even to go more extreme, like a powerlifting-oriented mindset.
Guys have to worry about progressive overload, but many don't have actual progressions that they stick to that make it easy to track that growth.
Yeah, so I agree with him there. I think if you don't have an actual program, basically a progression set up in your program, it's hard to measure growth. I agree, because if you're not tracking your strength at all, if you're not tracking your performance in the gym or anything you do in the gym, and you're also not tracking anything else, and you're purely basing your progress off of feel, the only way you'll really be able to tell your gains over time is probably in the long term. I think short term, it's really hard to feel that much different because it is pretty slow unless you're super in touch with your physique and you really understand everything. I think I have that to a certain degree, where I have enough experience where even if I add an eighth or a quarter of an inch to my arms, I can feel it, just because I'm very in tune with my physique. I take looks at it a lot. I take physique updates for this channel. I film my training and whatnot. I'm just in tune with it. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel there.
And when you are concerning yourself with consistent progressive overload, I hate to break it to you, that is a component of strength training. That is a strength specific trait, because you're focused on either handling more weight or you're focused on handling more reps at the same weight. So everybody...
Yeah, so you're saying if you're focusing on progressive overload, then you are focusing on strength. And I think this is one of those things where I kind of feel alone in my perspective here. I don't know who relates to me and who doesn't. I think with a focus on strength, you're biasing strength, and you can hope for hypertrophy to come through that based on your exercise selection, rep ranges, etc. in your program. When it comes to focusing on hypertrophy, I think the mindset that I like to go at it with is you're chasing stimulus, and progressive overload is more of a result of what happens. And of course, it's, to a certain extent, it's a two-sided give and take relationship. But I do think for the most part with hypertrophy training, progress is caused from stimulus and stacking stimulative sessions on top of each other. And I know it's common to see, oh, you can't just go in, train to failure, and just grow that easily. And of course, it's not that simple. But I don't think you can out-program just muscle building. I don't think you can just program your way to jacked muscles. I think you have to have that stimulus, and then your program is a reaction. The way your program is set up is a reaction to how you train to optimize that. And then I think whichever one you bias, you get more of. And of course, if you get super jacked, you're going to get strong because you have bigger muscles. And of course, if you get super strong, you're probably going to be more jacked too. It's just a matter of which one you bias a little bit more.
You should be focused on some type of double progression. Of course, I'm arguing that spending some time in the low rep range is worth your time, but any method of progression that allows you to chart how the weight goes up over time is going to keep you engaged. And when you do set those PRs, when you do set those records, it is extremely rewarding, and you can be pretty sure that you're not going to see those improvements in performance without also growing some mass in the process.
I agree with him there. I think it's just a matter of which one you bias psychologically. For myself, if I bias strength too much, I lose the joy of training the small muscle groups. I lose the joy and the focus of smaller movements. So I can't let myself get into that mindset, because then I get the big mover mindset where I have to do a big heavy lift to feel anything, and I can no longer enjoy the isolation lifts. And I know this is more something I feel with myself, but I have a very hard time imagining there's nobody else out there that feels that way, because of how dominant strength training's been over the past few years, especially since around 2014, 15, 16, when power building really started to take off. So the next couple points he has aren't necessarily things that relate to my philosophy or the channel, so I'm going to skip ahead to his point number 6. Like I said, it's a good idea to check out his video. I think it's good to understand both perspectives, and I think that will solidify which one you resonate more so with.
Number 6, this is probably the most superficial reason, but I think it is just as important because of the real effect it has. You can say it doesn't have an effect on you, but you're lying, and that is status. Eventually, somebody is going to ask the question, how much you bench?
All right, so basically what he's saying here is that your status is important, and I think psychologically, your status is important. I think if you're attaching your identity, or you're pursuing any type of whether it's strength or hypertrophy training, you don't want to just be super low on the totem pole, because it's not good to hang down there. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. But I think at the same time, if you're going to let the community, the people that are asking how much do you bench, dictate what you do in terms of your pursuits and fitness, I think you're losing a little bit of yourself when you're doing that. And I speak firsthand from experience in this, where I don't want to say brainwashed, but I was pulled into the power building community, where I ditched what I thought was best and what I enjoyed most, which was hypertrophy training, in pursuit of power building and even at times just pure powerlifting. And what ended up happening ultimately was that my status increased, but I almost felt like fake. And I think when you take, like, just to make an extreme example that we can all understand here, when you take, say, musicians, pop stars, celebrities, all this kind of stuff, they all sell out. They all sell out to what the young generation wants, and they all change their style, they change their music, and they change who they are to become a chameleon to the community. And one of my core philosophies is that I'm never going to be that person, because I know how I felt when I basically lost myself to the industry. And I wasn't even a creator at this point. I was just a lifter. And I think as a creator, it's even more important to say, all right, well, one of the most common questions that you're going to get is exactly what Alex said. It's how much do you bench? But if you're somebody that doesn't care how much you bench, don't worry about it. And you have to say, all right, well, even if people think less of me, then so what? But if you can say, in the short term, it sucks, and maybe I won't be taken as seriously. Even myself, I can't bench what I used to bench. I can't deadlift in the 600s anymore. But I think it's more important to pursue what you actually want to, as corny as that sounds, because ultimately you'll be most fulfilled that way, particularly in the long term, because once you actually achieve that physique, like I have now, where of course I'm not at my potential, I'm not the physique that I want to be at, but I'm at a spot where I've earned my respect in the industry because I said, all right, well, I'm going to sacrifice these big numbers. Everybody's asking me how much I bench. I fell into that trap and I benched a ton of weight, benched a bunch of reps and whatnot, and people were impressed. But it wasn't a long-term solution for me. So maybe while I had more respect in the short term, I was settling. And I think I made the long-term play by saying, all right, well, I'm going to sacrifice this, level up my physique, which is what I actually want to do. And I've built a community on YouTube, and I've built a channel and even a career for myself on here that I don't think I would have been able to do if I didn't have the right mindset. So as lopsided as my argument might be, I don't know if I'm going to be able to change an entire community or culture. I think that's a lofty task, but I don't think you should be dictated by what the community thinks. And like the way I see it now is you have these novice lifters that are out here asking, oh, how much do you bench? And am I really going to sacrifice what I want to do to please that person? And to draw another analogy here, let's say, of course, in the gym, people like to somehow correlate strength and hypertrophy because it's both in a gym, you're both using weights, so it's the same thing. It's like, yes, well, you're both maybe using similar methods. The pursuit of strength is the pursuit of performance inside the gym. The pursuit of hypertrophy is using the gym, sacrificing time out of your day to go to the gym even if you don't enjoy it, so you can look good and feel good about yourself outside the gym and have the physique that you want to outside the gym. So psychologically, these are two very extremely different pursuits. And while they're done in the same place, mentally and psychologically, they're extremely different in my opinion. I feel very lonely in that argument, but I'm trying to articulate this the best that I can to see if people do respond and relate to this. Take an analogy for this is hockey and figure skating. If the whole world is just obsessed with, oh, can you do this figure skating move? Can you do this trick? And you're somebody that's a 6'6" hockey goalie and nobody cares about you because you're not that good, but people are like, oh, you play hockey, can you do this figure skating move? And you're like, no, well, I can't do that. Are you going to go pursue the figure skating move, or are you going to say, all right, well, I'm 6'6", why don't I go become an NHL goalie? Even though it's not what people like at the time, and it's going to take a long time to develop that skill set. So I hope you enjoyed my little bit of a ramble there, but let's move on with this point.
Now, remember at the beginning of this, I talked about the overlap of these different corners of strength training culture. The fact is, lifters who don't care about being aesthetic, and people can say they don't care, but it absolutely affects their reputation, the way that people perceive them. Now, does it have to be important to you? Absolutely not. But for the physique-oriented guys, you all have to deal with the same thing. When you look strong, people are going to expect that you're strong. They are a little bit worse off.
So basically what he's saying is that if you're in the fitness industry, whether you're somebody that is a lifter, a recreational lifter, or you're someone that does have, say, a big following and this is your career, that if you're in a community that has a bunch of separate corners that are all overlapping, that you have to have a little bit of each to boost your status and to boost your reputation. And I think while I agree with that, I think if there is overlap, what happens here is that since there will be overlap in the result of your training, that should be more than enough to actually give you a good reputation. And I think if you're a power lifter, people don't expect you to have this perfectly aesthetic physique, but I think power building will build you at least enough muscle to people say, all right, well, he's got a decent physique. And of course, it's not optimized. And it's the same thing for hypertrophy. If you're super jacked and you have a bodybuilder's physique, you're going to be strong enough to be passable. I think a lot of people say, well, oh, I don't want to be this weak bodybuilder. That's a comment I get all the time, or at least I used to all the time. It's like, well, what's the point of being so jacked if you're just going to be weak? And it's like, I'm not just going to be weak. Like, I'm still stronger than most people. Just because I don't focus on it doesn't mean I'm not getting strong. It's just my byproduct. It's a side effect of training for hypertrophy. It's the same thing with focusing on strength. It's not that you don't get any hypertrophy from it. It's just that it's not optimized and you're not getting as much as you could. But in terms of your status and your reputation in the industry, I think I think each pursuit will get you enough side effects from the spillover into those other corners of the industry that do overlap with your current pursuit.
When they're not very aesthetic. When my body fat's very high, I know what that does as far as my authority, how people perceive me. And there is nothing worse than training so long to look a certain way, only to have people roll their eyes or dismiss you.
Yeah, so I feel for Alex here. That's super frustrating because if you it's the I even get this to a degree because I like to go into, I don't want to say I get super fat or anything, which I think that if people call me fat, I think you probably have problems, not myself. I don't think I'm fat. But I do get where he's saying that if he does bulk or maybe get up closer to 25-30% body fat, depending on what pursuit he's going for in terms of strength, if people dismiss him because he's not shredded and strong and a powerlifter and a strongman, that's super annoying. And that's just simply the unexperienced lifter, the inexperienced eye looking at someone and expecting perfection, when in all reality, he's peaking his strength and becoming elite in one pursuit that he wants to pursue at the expense of, say, leanness. And I feel bad for Alex because of this, because he has a great channel and he has a great experience and understanding of lifting and programming, but people don't take him seriously. But if I was in Alex's shoes, I'd say this sucks, but this is what I want to do, and this is what's going to let me be my most authentic self and maybe make changes in the community. So I think even though he's struggled through that and had those phases where maybe he's bulked up a bit to boost his strength, I think pursuing what you want, it lets your passion show through. And I think that's what's happened to me on this channel, where yes, I'm not nearly as strong as I used to be, but I'm still strong enough to be passable, I guess. But my physique's gone to that next level where it's the long-term play, where I now have a better reputation than I would have if I just kind of dabbled in everything and wasn't true to what I actually wanted to do, as corny as that is.
You as not being that strong. You can say it doesn't matter, but I know there's some of you out there, it's going to get under your skin, and it should get under your skin because it was an easy thing to prevent. Part of being a part of strength culture in general is being able to cross these lines and these boundaries. It is a great thing. It's an asset to everybody who participates. It shouldn't be avoided. So this is kind of a call to like tear down these barriers. Don't go so far out of your way to identify as this one thing in your own little niche over in the corner with the other weirdos that are into strength training the exact same way that you are.
Okay, so I think we disagree on this one here. So he's saying that I think he thinks that there's more overlap than I think there is. I just think that psychologically and mentally, hypertrophy training is so far different than general strength training, powerlifting, Olympic lifting, strongman, all that kind of stuff, because I think those are performance-related pursuits. Hypertrophy is more so a state of being, and I think it's more of a... this is something that I can never explain well, but it's more of like, I guess, spiritual thing, or more of a... I don't even really know how to explain it. I guess like in the quote-unquote art form that all the bros like to say, oh, bodybuilding's an art form. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but that's the best way that I personally can put it. I think bodybuilding is entirely different. I think it's art in a state of being versus performance in more of a sport. So I do think that while they share a physical location and physical equipment to build their own separate pursuits, I think the pursuit and the expression that comes with it psychologically and mentally, I think hypertrophy, it doesn't fit in with the rest. Let's just be real. It's entirely different. I'm a hypertrophy purist. I feel no connection whatsoever to powerlifting, to strength training, to strongman or Olympic lifting. It's entirely different. And these are things that, like, I respect powerlifting, but I have no interest in it. It's this, the way I see powerlifting is the way I see like a professional sport or the X Games or the Olympics, whatever sport within there. It's much different. I would compare hypertrophy training to more of like being an author than I would to strongman or powerlifting in terms of pure psychology.
If you get out, you branch out in different things, you keep one toe in the water, you're going to have a better experience. You'll probably be able to socialize and network better for your time in this field.
Yeah, so you're saying you'll be able to socialize and network better. I do agree with that to an extent. But I think if you truly become elite and proficient at the pursuit that you're doing, I almost think that while it might be better in some cases to be well rounded, I think it's better to become elite in what your pursuit is. So personally, like I've connected with other strength guys, but I think the reason that they might reach out to me or the reason I might reach out to them is because they're very good at what they do or because I'm, in their eyes, very good at what I do. And I think my ultimate goal to be the most connected and helpful that I can be in the community is to be the best that I can at what I do rather than being well rounded. So I don't necessarily think that he's wrong. I think we just have a different perspective with this one where I would rather be a purist and be the best that I possibly can achieve in my own pursuit.
And that's all going to snowball into more longevity in the field and to reaching higher heights. I think that's a very real thing. And for as much as general lifting culture has to offer, if all you have to do is tweak your training just a little bit to do something that is just as valuable for growing muscle, but also has the benefit of making you stronger, potentially accelerating the muscle growth process, and it can keep you a little more engaged in these other arenas in lifting culture, if it can keep you like one short prep away from doing well in a powerlifting meet as you become more advanced, or if you can actually go into a strongman show and relate to what's going on because you broke outside of your bubble, that's all for the better, and that does more to solidify lifting culture as a whole. I think that's not just better for you as somebody trying to build a more aesthetic physique, but I absolutely think it's better for everybody involved. So those are my...
Okay, so he's basically saying that for lifting culture as a whole, including hypertrophy, that it's better to be able to kind of relate and connect or even pursue a feat of strength or whatever in any of these separate pursuits. And I think for lifting culture as a whole, I agree. I just think the difference here is hypertrophy training psychologically is just so far different. Like, I don't know if anybody agrees. I don't think anybody agrees with me on this. I just see hypertrophy training as an orange in a room full of apples. And I think that's where I disagree with him, but I am a fan of lifting culture. I am a fan of powerlifting and Olympic lifting. I'm not crazy about it. Maybe fan isn't the right word, but I do respect it and I wish the best on it. I just think that when you're pursuing your own hypertrophy training plan, I think it's best to understand what you truly want out of it and pursue that to the best of your ability and not just pursue other things and become well-rounded at the expense of what you truly want. And I know that's not necessarily how everybody ends up, but for myself, I feel like I was pulled into other avenues that truly weren't what I want, and it didn't lead to any long-term success with myself. So, yeah, that's basically all I've got for you guys today. Definitely go check out Alex's channel. Keep your eye out for Carell's response to this video as well. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed.